Want to know more about rock, jazz, rhythm, and blues? You got to start from the bottom up. The Bass Guitar Channel radio show with David C. Gross and Tom Semioli. Two bass road warriors tell tales, interview the greats, and spin more great music than you can shake a Chapman stick at. The Bass Guitar Channel radio show with your hosts, David C. Gross and Tom Semioli, every Monday at 8 on Cygnus Radio.
Hi, this is David Gross for the Bass Guitar Channel radio show on CygnusRadio.com. Tonight, along with head honcho for Know Your Bass Player, Tom Semioli, we have a special treat. Bassist Larry Grenadier, who's played with everyone from Pat Metheny to Brad Meldau, Charles Lloyd. Great artists, all of them. He is on board to talk to us tonight about music, the bass, influences, and all things Bass Guitar Channel radio show orient. So let's begin. Hi, Tom. Hi, Larry.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
Good.
All right.
Now, where are you located now?
Yeah, I'm in Kingston, New York. You know where that is?
Yes, I go to Bruce Milner in Woodstock for my teeth.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know him. Yeah. What's the name of his practice?
Transcendental.
Right.
Do you know that he was the original keyboard player in Every Mother's Son? He basically financed his dental career on Come On Down to My Boat, Baby.
Yeah, he likes to talk about it. It's great. Yeah. I went to him a couple times, and I can't remember why we ended up switching, but maybe it was an insurance thing or something, but he was great.
I've been going to him since the 70s. I told him I had to stop because I don't want his hands to start shaking while he's doing any of the work.
So why is it important for bassists to have good dental work and good dentists? What is?
You think it's unique to bass players?
Yeah, I think it is. I think we have the best teeth of anyone on the bandstand.
We have to smile because no one else does.
And so forget about your right hand technique and muting. Let's talk.
Talk
molars.
So Larry, we actually talked, I think, in 2004 when you did the Fly record, the first Fly record with Mark and Jeff Ballard. Yeah, great. As David and I like to start off, what the heck have you been doing in lockdown?
Well, probably what everybody else is doing. I mean, there's been some great parts of it with being home with my family, not traveling. My son is 15, so it's a nice time to be home, and it's really the first time I've been off like this since I was probably 16, I think. It's like a shift, but I was just saying to my wife, how surprisingly easy it's been in many ways. I mean, we've been really lucky, so I don't want to complain about stuff. Right. It's been relatively easy as far as like not doing gigs. I mean, I miss the musicians I play with. I miss playing with a drummer tremendously because I haven't really been doing like sessions with people. Occasionally I've been starting to do more recording now. It's been nice. That's opened up. But before that, a couple streams, and stuff like that. But other than that, just practicing, which has been, something I've always really enjoyed. I've never been have had to force myself to practice. So the interesting thing for me with practicing has been just staying inspired. And, usually the gigs are what kind of guides the practice. And at this point, it's kind of just allowing things to come in as they do, whether it's hearing a certain record or reading something or, I don't know, different forms of inspiration and just kind of running with it. So I've been, practicing and teaching online. Kind of same thing everybody else is doing, trying to keep my calluses from getting soft, Physical things, with the double bass, especially, of just like staying physically connected to the instrument. Yeah.
But now your practice regimen is focused mostly on classical music, yes?
I mean, I'd say 50% of it, probably, with the bow. I have a hard time even saying regiment, not so disciplined. It's pretty fluid in that I kind of move with what I'm interested in the moment and might stick with it for, some things I keep on doing, but a lot of things I just kind of get to as more of an etude that I'm trying to get it ready for performance. And so I'm just kind of using it pragmatic to increase my technique and show my weaknesses in technique. And classical music for me does that really well, whether it's music written for bass or for any other instrument. It's just kind of like, how do I get this out of this instrument and make it speak? And same thing with electric bass stuff for me. It's always been bringing electric bass stuff to the upright and seeing how can I make this speak on this bigger, thicker stringed instrument and have the same clarity, that same drive, that it does on electric bass. So just finding different sources for that inspiration.
It's interesting you mentioned that because your former teacher, Ron Carter, was to my ears one of those rare bassists who can actually articulate an upright almost like an electric bass. You think of the rhythm and blues records he did with, let's say, Roberta Flack. And then, of course, Tribe Called Quest has sampled a lot of Ron Carter's bass parts. So kind of interesting how the electric bass obviously came so much later and really didn't gain respect in the jazz world, let's say, till Jaco came along in 76. And you yourself started out on electric bass with your dad, right? He got you your first instrument, didn't he?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, most of the people my generation and younger started on electric. I think most of us, not all of us. We all have that connection, right? And also just what we listened to growing up was definitely very much informed by that music, that, you know, whether it was Jaco or Beatles or Roberta Flack.
Of course, you were out on the West Coast, so it wasn't just Jaco. We always kid around, it's Jaco and Rocco.
Well, you know,
right in your hometown.
Amazing thing about the East Bay, you know, you think about that moment, late 60s, early 70s, you had Larry Graham, you had Rocco, Paul Jackson, Sly, who played amazing bass. The other great bass player who also played with Sly when he was quite young.
Doug Rush. Was it Doug Rush?
Well, him too. No, but he's still around. He's playing, he plays a lot with the pick.
Gosh, I can't think of him. Is it the guy that went on to play with Robin Trower?
Maybe he did. I don't know if he played with
Rusty Allen, are you thinking?
Oh, he's another great one. Yeah. I think Oakland too. Yeah, so I mean, it's really kind of an amazing bass moment. I mean, not only great bass players, but
Jack Cassidy, Phil Lesh, yeah.
Absolutely, Jack Cassidy, right. Who I'm just kind of getting into now, finally, and appreciating him. It took me a second. Yeah, not only great, but changed the way the bass is played. All those guys.
Right. Dad was a trumpet player, and he got you your electric bass. Was he looking for somebody to back him up and outline the changes?
Well, he had stopped playing by the time we were born, actually. He had kind of given it up. But he had instilled in the music bug in myself and my two brothers. And so my brother, one brother, Steve, played guitar and Phil played trumpet. Plays trumpet still. So he thought, well, a bass would be a good extra instrument to help, you know, we all play together. I mean, it could have been drum. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly why. Yeah, I took the electric bass really quick, and, you know, like all of us, like we played in a band right away, you know, like 1 week into holding the instrument, it's like, okay, yeah, right. You know,
it's only four strings.
It's only four strings.
Right. And you only play one note at a time. So it was, you know, pretty easy to like cop stuff off records and play with people. So, you know, the idea of playing in a band was right away, you know, like that's what music's about. And I'm really glad for that, because I think about the opposite of like having to practice by yourself for years before you even get to play with other people. It just sounds so sad.
Well, one of the main reasons I wanted to have you on, besides to showcase your brilliance, is the fact that I think electric bass players can learn from acoustic players, and of course, vice versa. Obviously, our first meeting was the fact that I was blown away by part 2 of your interview on the double bass workshop in Britain, where you went up your scales one way, down another, up another, and down another. And I just went, oh my God, I just got my new book. That's when I sent you the PDF after I finished writing 6-string Learn the Fingerboard. There's so many different parameters to playing an acoustic bass. I got one in June, and I've been scaring my family for months. I'm very good at Bernard Herrmann's Psycho theme. So you're saying that some of your classical practice is really very, very helpful in terms of the arco technique.
Yeah, you know, it's good for everything. You know, that's why I encourage all my students to spend some time with it at some point and get with a classical teacher, because it informs the whole thing. It informs, obviously, the right hand bow technique, but the left hand becomes really magnified in some ways, obviously with intonation, but with shifting, moving around this really big fingerboard, you know, for example, like this idea of improvising fingerings for scales. This kind of came out of that practice of just trying to feel comfortable with the whole fingerboard, where I can have freedom of movement and express myself in the way that I see fit sonically for whatever situation I find myself in the moment as it moves in the middle of the song, you know, not feel tied to a certain area of the bass that I feel more comfortable in than another part, you know. So it just opens up to me the full expression of the instrument and the confidence to move around and to grab notes at any point, because you're cool with it. You know you can get that sound, the intonations can be cool. You can move out of any area of the bass. And then also, I think, just musically, I mean, you're talking whatever, 700 years of music, of information that's organized in such a beautiful way. And jazz definitely comes out of this type of music. So just for me, melodically, harmonically, all that classical stuff really informs my jazz playing too. So sound production. So the bow, to me, it does more than just the right hand. It's a whole way of enlarging your scope of what you're taking in.
And I think also when you're going up and down the neck in various ways, you're beginning to hear intervals a bit differently. When I was at Berkeley a million years ago, when the electric bass was considered a bastard instrument, as a matter of fact, John Neves once said to me that the electric bass is not a valid musical instrument. However, so many of my teachers saying, get your ears in shape. Ear training became ear straining. At the same time, with your approach of being anywhere and being comfortable is directly related to ear training.
Well, that's true. I mean, ear training is like you have to hear the note before you play it. So that's, intonation is such a huge thing with the upright bass, right? I mean, you want to play it in tune and it's not easy. One of the things that really helps is hearing the pitch before you play it so that you can adjust right away if it's slightly off. That's another part of ear training, I think. Or, hearing it and feeling, is it really in the center of the pitch? And that's another type of ear training. It's not really a perfect pitch, but you get to kind of that on the bass where you can not only hear it, but you feel the bass vibrating when it's really in the center. Yeah. And once you can do that really well, then you can start to play with it. And, if you want to play it a little flat, you're in control of that. You can just more control over it.
Now, going back to the solo record, The Gleaners, which I think everyone should pick up. It's really incredible. To me, it couldn't have been better recorded. I think ECM is probably the premier record company, like Blue Note was in the 50s. They know how to lovingly capture everything, and the sound was great. Did you do an interesting tuning on the Gleaners, or is that just EADG?
Part of the discoveries for me while I was preparing that record were checking out different tunings on the bass, and I just kind of experimented for a while, and found some that I liked, and they typically were all lower pitched, not tuning up. When I tuned up, it was interesting, but sonically, it didn't quite move me the same way. But when I would tune things down, and then if I would tune them so they weren't in perfect fourths, so maybe I combined thirds and fourths, all of a sudden, obviously the harmonics changed, but just the way the bass vibrates changed, and it just inspired me to play some different music. And so I would retune or detune or whatever, use scottatura, and then I would play something and hear something different come out of the instrument. And then I would kind of learn how to play with that tuning as well. So I did know what notes I was playing eventually. But at first, it's kind of a way to kind of come to the instrument anew. I would never have played that in a standard fourth tuning, So yeah, I did experiment with that. So on the Tune the Gleaner, I think that's tuned low, high, D, G, D, F sharp. So that's kind of a really different one. Yeah.
Now, is that, did you basically write that for that, what is it, Jean Millet, the picture? Did you?
Oh, you know how these titles work. It's like it's a seed of an inspiration, right? And I saw this great movie by Agnes Varda called The Gleaners, and I connected with not only the times that we were in, but just what I had been thinking about while practicing. So yeah, it came out of that, but just as a...
Well, it's interesting you talk about retuning, because tomorrow we have an interview with Mike Manring, who is like the king of tuning or detuning or
right,
whatever he's doing.
The thing was, when I started to do some gigs after the record came out, solo concerts, tuning thing becomes kind of an issue because, it kind of breaks up the flow, and, it takes a second. I've gotten much quicker with tuning up the bass now, which has been really good. In the studio, it's easy to do that. And also I was going to say about the sound, with ECM, that is definitely Manfred Eicher. He is ECM, and he's a former bass player, and his natural affinity to the instrument is incredible, and to all instruments, but the double bass particularly. I mean, it's just always recorded great on all the records, and I grew up loving those records in part because of the bass always sounded so great on it.
Yeah.
So, he can go into, he's a producer, but he can also go into the studio and move some mics around and really change the sound dramatically. He's got so much experience and knowledge in that.
Well, think about all the ECM recordings you actually did. You've been a friend of ECM forever. I mean, Wolfgang and Paul Motian.
Yeah. And I think the first ones I did were with Charles Lloyd, maybe. But yeah, and so we developed a relationship over the years, and so that's how the record just came out of a conversation about the possibility of it.
Well, that version of Lotus Blossom, which is on The Water Is Wide, just a fabulous sound.
That was a great record. That was the first time I had played with Charles. I had played with Billy Higgins when I was a kid, 18.
He's a West Coast guy, right?
He was in L.A., yeah.
Yeah.
And, he was always one of my favorite drummers. So to get to connect and play with him again was really amazing, and to do some gigs after the record came out. I was playing with Brad at that time, and we were out in L.A. playing, I think, at Largo, this club in L.A. And so we did that record during the days, and it was just a great, one of those, go into a recording and the vibe is right away. It just, everything comes together, and I think the sound kind of matched that energy that we were all at the same time.
And it's scary how he can reproduce that rainbow studio sound anywhere.
Right. Well, that was done in another great studio actually out there in LA. Yeah, a studio called Cello. Yeah, good engineers. Good mics, good musicians. Most records should sound better than they do. It's funny. It's like, it's not rocket science really, but it is everything coming together, right? It has to be, the sound has to be there from the instrument, from the player, from the hands, and then it has to be captured thoughtfully and with care.
Well, one of the interesting thing about the Gleaners record is you think about bass players, we're always in the studio with other musicians. We're part of a gang, part of a posse. What was the experience of being all by your lonesome in there?
Well, I wish I had talked to you before I did it, because that's the one thing I didn't think about. I was just concerned with the music, and
sure.
But once I started playing in the studio by myself, I was like, oh my God, this is really bizarre, because like you said, bass players were always reacting. So that was a real kind of bizarre moment where I had to come to terms with it pretty quick, because, it's like 2 days to record. It's very quick the way they make records. So once I could hone in on the sound of the instrument in the room, Avatar in New York City, it's not a huge room, but it's got a nice sound in it. So once I could feel and hear the sound coming back to me in the room, that was the inspiration. That was what I was playing to. That was what I was reacting to, instead of drummer or piano.
The tune Pettiford, I assume you have a strong affinity for Oscar Pettiford?
Absolutely.
There's one of his unreleased or just not re-released recordings. I think it's in the orchestra. And he does this song called Deep Passion. Are you familiar with that song?
Lucky Thompson, yes. Very much.
Right,
I love this song. We used to play this with Fly, actually. I love that song. It is a very passionate song, right? The composition, but also the way it's played, for sure. But Oscar Pettiford, is funny, was just a fortunate happenstance of getting one of his records very early on for me, before I really knew so much. I mean, I knew Ray Brown, I knew Ron Carter, but not too many other bass players. And somehow I saw the record and I liked the cover and I bought it. And I just connected with his clarity, his melodicism, just the way he brought the bass out front. It just captured me back when I was 13 years old. But yeah, I've continued all my life to really have a lot of respect for him and what he brought to the instrument, and what he brought to me. He's one of those seminal figures between swing and bebop,
yes.
who really helped bring us into a whole other era of playing.
Yeah, I think you could put Jimmy Blanton and then Pettiford is like the next step.
Exactly. Then you got Ray Brown, so yeah, absolutely.
Another thing I want all of our listeners to sort of get is that to be a consummate musician, you just can't listen to the idiom you just listened to.
Well, this is what I'm always saying about what's the beauty of the bass is, and it's great for electric bass players to know too. The bass's function in every style of music is the same. What we give the music, we show the form, we show the movement of the harmony. By playing it, the rhythm feels better than if we weren't playing. And then there's all this melodic content, this counterpoint, this counterline that's happening throughout the whole tune. And whether it's repeated like in pop music or it's always changing like in jazz, the function is the same. Bass players are a great spot in the band to recognize, oh yeah, all music is the same, really. And that our sources of inspiration are endless. It's a really great position to kind of see that and to see, wow, I can go to Bach, I can go to Jimi Hendrix, I can go to Delaney and Bonnie, I can go to, I don't know, it's wide open.
Early in your career, you work with many legacy artists, Joe Henderson, Stan Getz, Jack DeJohnette, you mentioned Paul Motian. Now, you think about all the bass players they made great records with, Ron McClure, Ron Carter, Eddie Gomez, Charlie Hayden, the list goes on. When you work with them, did you make a conscious effort to reference those players? Did you thinking about their history and then you coming on board as a younger player?
I think that was stuff I had done earlier. I had kind of soaked up a lot of influence, those people you mentioned. Some of it was transcribing, but more so of just figuring out through listening a lot of what they've given to the bass, and sonically, harmonically, rhythmically. So I'd kind of gone through that with most of those people. And so when I went to play with the drummers who may have played a lot with those bass players, I wasn't consciously thinking of it. A certain moment, something might inspire me to think of one of those guys, and it might just come out. That's the thing, is like you take all these influences, you sift them through this thing, and eventually it's you at the end. I could listen to certain records and say, oh yeah, that's I got that from Charlie Hayden, or I got that from Ron Carter. But I'm hoping that other people don't really hear it like that. They just hear it as this kind of thing that becomes me.
But also it shows the importance of knowing the history of the instrument. Really.
I think so. I mean, every once in a while I run into somebody who has no idea of the history, and they still kind of play really good. So I think it's important. I think it informs us. It helps us develop our own sound eventually. But, I guess we're at kind of a different point now where there's so much information available so easily that it can be a bit overwhelming, and it might be a bit of a distraction. I think when I was a kid, I had maybe one record coming in a month or every few weeks, and now you have millions of records available at a click. To me, it really helps to study. It's like anything else you try to do well. If you want to cook something well, you just go to somebody who does it better than you. They're doing the same thing. How to walk on a blues. Okay, I'm going to listen to Paul Chambers. I'm going to listen to Ron Carr, Jimmy Garrison. Why wouldn't you do that if you're trying to learn how to do something? It's like, oh yeah, let's go to the source and see, oh yeah, they're doing that. And then, oh yeah, I can do that too. I can kind of get to that. It's kind of an obvious way to learn how to play music. I guess the only drawback would be if you got super hung up on one person, kind of pushed away everybody else.
Yeah, well, that sort of happened. We were talking about that in the 70s when Jaco came along, and then everybody added that bridge pickup, right? And that was the end.
And that's the thing, like nobody can sound like Jaco, no matter how hard they try,
Because he listened so much. Yeah, I wanted to ask you another question. One of the other reasons that it's important for our bass guitar channel show to have upright players is Tom and I were talking at one point. I said, if two 10-year-old boys were one was given an electric bass, the other was given an upright, the electric bass player would be given links to YouTube, and the upright bass player would be given Edward Nane or Samandel.
Right. I think it's changed, because of the internet. I mean, I have this issue with classical and jazz on the double bass, the way it's taught in schools, and that how it's still extremely separated. There's these walls, physical walls too, but the mental walls between the department. The jazz bass student might be able to take one lesson a month with the classical teacher. Never does the classical bass student go take a lesson with the jazz teacher. It's just like this very territorial thing that to me does a real damage to both music. It's not helping either music to grow. And I mean, I think it's a little better now than it probably used to be. Like you said, of the way that the bass guitar was viewed, at Berkeley even, it still exists. It's maybe a little less in Europe. But in the States, I still find this real distinction between the departments. And I just don't feel like, I'll just say it. I just don't feel like the classical musicians really understand what we're doing as jazz musicians. They think we're kind of just playing whatever we want to play off the top of our head. So they don't really see the relevance to it for their own music and how it can inform their own playing. Not everybody, but in general speaking.
Sure.
To me, it does it really to helping each music grow into the 21st century. It's really too bad.
Well, I remember a story where a friend of mine was telling me that he was talking with Gary Carr, and Gary Carr, he's sort of on the outside of things, even when he's on the inside, but he said, I like to paint myself into a corner and then try and find a way out.
He to me is the great exception, right? And he always appreciated jazz bass players, connected like with Richard Davis, and like they would play. And he's the great example to me. And how it probably informed his classical playing, just like with Edgar Meyer, how his, bluegrass country's music informed, or Stevie Wonder, the vocal way of his approach, it's just so obvious, but in academia, it's very confined, and to me, it can be very limiting. And so I'm always asking the jazz bass students to take some lessons with the classical teacher, but I wish they would do the reverse too a bit more often, or show up to the clubs, and see what have some interest in what we're really doing.
Yeah, it would certainly help them. That's for sure. Loosen them up a little bit.
Yeah.
But also you have to also take into consideration now with YouTube, and it's the best of times, it's the worst of times. You can now actually watch the masters, especially some of the so many of the jazz programs from the 60s that were on in Europe that we never saw here.
Right.
And even just watching vintage clips from like the Steve Allen show and things that you can really get a college education watching classical and jazz players on YouTube, whereas you might have fumbled listening to records, your hand positioning might have been wrong, but now you can see a Ron Carter, you can see a Charles Mingus, and actually how they articulated and incorporate that into your own repertoire.
Absolutely. No, it's a whole new ballgame with that. That's the great part of the internet, right? Of being able to see all these people that aren't alive anymore. I mean, obviously it's not like seeing them in person, but it's what we got, and it's the next best thing right now. So yeah, I think that in collaboration with a good teacher, teachers are really important at certain points in people's developments, whether it's electric bass or upright bass. And also, it's like when you hear a record when you're a kid, you might love it. But then you hear it 10 years later and you still love it, but you hear so much more to it. Like, it grows as you grow. And I think, teachers are really helpful in pointing things out. Like, did you see that? Why did he do that? How did he do that? What's going on in the rest of the band that made the bass player want to play that note or that rhythm? Kind of help push the understanding a bit more so that we can go beyond ourselves and kind of get some other information coming.
One of your more successful, obviously, collaborations is with Brad Meldau and Jorge Rossi, and then later Jeff Ballard. When you guys first started at the Village Gate, did you have any idea that the trio would be so successful as it was?
No, it was just a gig. It was a gig that was really fun. And, it just kind of, the timing was good because Brad got a record deal with Warner Brothers.
Right.
They were behind him. And, so we were able to make records really regularly and then go to, not that they helped us tour, but the records were out there in a way internationally. And so we were touring really a lot and just kind of hitting it hard, and it just connected on many levels musically, but also just the way the audiences would show up. And so it just, it was the right moment for that. Mm-hmm. And that Brad was also willing to make the investment in that this was a steady band. It wasn't a band that, Larry can't make it, so I'm going to call somebody out. It was just like, we all committed to it, and especially him writing music and basing this idea of a trio around, at first, me and Jorge. So it's really also Brad's dedication to it, for sure, not just our dedication.
And that trio also got a lot of radio support on NPR and satellite radio, which is so very important because it's so hard to hear jazz on the radio.
Right, yeah, very little jazz on the radio anymore, sure. But, this was, I don't know, that first record might have came out in 94 or something like this. So it's almost like a different time. I think it's really some different, the internet was what it was back then. It was very not much part of it. So it's a different time now.
Now, you live in a very bass-centric part of the country. You had Gary, may he rest in peace. You got Steve Swallow, Tony Levin. You ever do a... hey, let's bass players get together kind of thing?
We don't, bass players, we stay away from each other.
Yeah. You don't want them taking your gigs.
Yeah. Well, it's actually the opposite. I mean, I think bass players, when we do that, we don't do that really. When we're home, we're kind of in our own little bubbles. And Dave Holland is another one up here, right? One of the first ones to come up. I find on the road, when you do run into bass, but we're the ones that do hang out. Other instrumentalists may not as much. I think we can enjoy each other. I think also, it's there are enough gigs for bass players, so there's not that extra weird thing about fighting over gigs and stuff. And I think we all appreciate what each other does, and we can all kind of see different ways of using the instrument, appreciate different styles of playing.
It's funny, we were talking with Freebo yesterday, and he was talking about the first time he met Jocko. It's a great story. He's saying that he walked up to Jocko, they started talking gear and stuff, and then he goes, "So Jocko, how many hours a day do you practice?" And Jocko goes like this, "I only practice 2 hours, but it's really intense."
Yeah. That's what it's about, right? Yeah, it's not about the number. Yeah. I met Jocko late in his life, early in my life. I was playing a gig in Las Vegas when I was still in high school with the great sax player, Charles McPherson. We're playing in one of these casinos, had like a jazz club in it. This must have been 83, 84. Jocko came in. He was playing in town somewhere. And, I heard his first rap, I was really into Jocko, but, that's everybody was. So he came in, he wanted to sit in on upright. So he came on stage, and Charles, who's like a really like stone cold bebopper, called Cherokee, really, really up-tempo version of Cherokee. And Jocko is like hanging, like dealing, for like maybe 5 minutes or so. And then he got tired and gave me the bass back. But, I got to talk to him a bit after that. And it was just an amazing thing to meet somebody who you've heard so deeply. And he was super great, super avuncular, fatherly, caring in a really beautiful way. Very, nice. Very thoughtful cat. And then I saw him a couple times later because he had moved to San Francisco for a few months. But, this is near the end of his life. I mean, what a great example to me of a guy who soaked up all music, and figured out how to put it all together and make it so distinctly his own. Sonically, harmonically, rhythmically.
And it's funny how many styles, you're right. Really, my favorite solo of his is an Ian Hunter tune, All American Alien. That's a great solo.
Yeah, on a rock record, yeah.
Yeah. So even Ian Hunter got it. Right, Tom?
Well, that was, that's kind of what introduced Jocko. That was the Amazing Year of Bass. That was 1976. When Jocko joined Weather Report. And then, of course, he did the Ian Hunter record, which introduced him to a wide audience. Again, this is the days before internet and things like that.
Yeah, it was just like this boom, 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 with Bright Size Life, Heavy Weather,
sure.
His solo record. It was like, man, give me a break. It's just like just piling on this stuff that's like changing the way the instruments play. But, I was also really into Stanley at that time. Jeff Berlin was another one who was really at the same moment kind of came up with his own way of playing.
Right.
Swallow, of course, came up with an extremely unique way of playing. So, yeah, another cat who, to me, has such a strong identity, came out hitting hard, in his own unique way.
Jewish kid from Great Neck. What can you do?
Can't keep him down. Yeah.
Well, I've always said, Tom Semioli, David Gross, Jews and Italians, we are the record.
With our overbearing mothers. So, Larry, let me ask you now, you talk about the challenges of playing a solo all by yourself in the studio. There are also challenges playing in a trio and challenges in backing up or accompanying a singer, such as Rebecca. Let's talk about that. Talk about your role in the trio as opposed to, let's say, a traditional small group with horns.
Well, what I always say about that, once you kind of get your shit together, is that it's really about whom you're playing with rather than what instruments you're playing with. It's about the personalities and the way that you interact with those particular people rather than the instrument that they're playing.
Right.
Eventually. I mean, I'm kind of being more broad about it because, there are certain specific things that change if there's no chordal instrument, then it's like automatically I'm aware of that, so I have to maybe make the harmony a bit more clear.
Like Fly, when Fly.
Yeah, but even in that, that's another example of something that comes up in that band because we don't really play free in that band. We everything's kind of based on compositions, and but I think sometimes what I'm aware of, like I don't want the audience, the listener, to think that we're just kind of playing free. Like I want them to have a sense of form in that there is a circular motion to this form and that, not that I'm trying to hit everybody over the head with that, but I am trying to bring a certain clarity to the harmonic movement so that it doesn't just sound like we're playing anything.
That Paul Motian record you did with Rebecca, what was it, on Broadway number 4.
Right.
Make a tune like High, Wide, and Handsome, where it's just you and Chris Potter. And for the life of me, I know they say Paul Motian plays drums, but he doesn't play drums. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he plays himself. He plays what playing with him, when that record was done, we were playing quite a bit in town at the Vanguard fairly regularly. What I experienced with him really early on was, people know of his playing with Bill Evans, with Keith Jarrett. It's more open, free. But there's also this, once you play with him, you feel this root of something much more ancient in his playing that to me is, I think of it as really like almost pre-bebop or early bebop. There's this center to the sound, to the beat, even when he's playing completely free, that the bass can latch onto and connect with. So there is this center to it. And so he's got both. He's one of those magical guys. Charlie Hayden was like that too. He could play really loose, but it had this center to the beat. Even if it wasn't like a steady rhythm, there was this underlying pulse. And that's what Paul always had. And whether we're playing in time or rubato, it was a beautiful thing because it had that. So I think younger musicians might miss out on that. They might think, I'm just going to play rubato and play loose and play kind of cymbally, and there's no bottom to their sound or something. And they're missing what Paul had, which was so connected to the past, but he had moved it on to something completely.
Thank you. That's great.
These drummers are really interesting, like him and Jack DeJohnette too, I think, who is another one who is kind of at heart a very free drummer too. But when you play with them, you sense this older part of their playing that's in everything that they play. And I always want younger drummers to appreciate that so they don't think it's all this other stuff that's kind of more airy without the bottom. It's like a bass player who does it. It's like you need both. You need the air, you need the earth. And without it, it's like something is not quite right. That band came out of a gig that we all did up here. I think it was at Bearsville Theater benefit concert, and it was like, oh yeah, this is really nice. This combination is nice, And for me, it was fantastic to play with those guys every night.
Jack too is up in the Woodstock area, right?
Yeah, he's been up here since the early 70s. Yeah.
One other thing, going back to technique, I had forgotten in my playing about open strings. In June, I get this tub. I'm trying to negotiate it. And I'm going, open strings are my friends. Care to comment?
That's exactly, funny because, like you said, we're double bass players are steered towards these classical method books written 100, 200 years ago. While they're helpful, they're also kind of outdated in some ways of thinking, especially for a jazz bass player. I mean, this is the whole thing with me. Classical music is written out, jazz is not. Our ability to navigate on the spur of the moment and move with the music is different. Classical music, you work out your fingerings by yourself or with a section. You show up at the gig, and that's what you do. I mean, obviously, Every night's different. Fundamentally, the bowings and the fingerings are the same. Jazz, no. Right? So our ability to kind of be able to move at any moment and anywhere and get the sound and intonation that we want and the attack, everything, takes a different learning process would be helpful to us, So that's why I encourage students to do this thing, like you say, they're improvising your fingerings. In the process of doing that, you are going to close off some open strings because that's one way. But in the process, you're also going to open up some strings and you see, oh man, this made it so much easier to move through the bass organically or holistically, like slowly move up and down instead of just going up to the G string, up the G string, back down the G string, over,
Yep.
And so once you realize that, you say, oh man, it gave me a nice open, long note that's in tune, and it gave me the chance to shift. And now I'm in this new part of the bass and I can move up here, So yeah, open strings are definitely our friends. And, you have to be able to play an A on the E string and play it closed to be able to have confidence to do that. But in the course of a real playing situation, I'm using open strings all the time to help me move through the instrument.
That was a great technique. Obviously, if you read the charts on Standing in the Shadows of Motown, Jamerson, that was his thing, to switch to jump registers and to get into different positions. James always used the open string on all those records.
I mean, if you go back to him and then, Jamad and Chuck Rainey and all these great bass players, they're all coming out of upright bass.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
Whether they played it like Jamerson or they just heard it a lot. It's like drummers to me from the rock and roll, early drummers and rock bands in the 60s. They weren't listening to other rock drummers, honestly. They were listening to jazz drummers, So
Sure.
There's always that connection of the role of rock and roll coming from jazz, coming from swing in early. That's why that music sounds so great to me,
Charlie Watts.
Slowly, Charlie Watts, Ringo, Bono.
Bill Ward from Black Sabbath swung.
Absolutely.
Well, look, Tom and I have always said there's the bass players pre-Jocko and post-Jocko.
Yeah, that's another.
There's really a difference.
Right.
I mean, think about Willie Dixon. Pretty much every rock and roll bass player out of Britain who was listening to the blues Grew up on Willie Dixon.
That's
Is
right.
there a blues riff that Willie Dixon did not write? I don't.
Well, he
Yeah,
said
I
he
mean,
did.
I hope he got some money. I hope he had some money at the end of his life because he deserved it. No, it's a different thing, and I think in the 70s, 80s, we get more into the rock and less of the roll. So I mean, to me, it's always finding like That's why it's so. We talk about history, we want to be a contemporary bass player, right, or a contemporary musician, but we also need to inform ourselves so that it maintains a certain groove and vibe, which to me comes from the past. And the further we get from it, the more possible it is that we lose it. So even more reason to kind of continue to do research to check out what this all came out of, which primarily blues. So it just informs our rhythmic part, mostly phrasing, the way we place the beat, so that it has a connection to that and it just feels better.
You think it's the best of times and the worst of times because now I can access just about any type of music at my fingertips, yet maybe I'm losing out on that traditional album experience where like when we were all growing up, where you listened to an album and you wore it out.
Yeah, that's the big question. I mean, I kind of base it on what I see my students dealing with, most of my connection with the younger people. So it's both. Like you said, I think there's a beautiful opportunity to see people on YouTube play, even like when I was in when I first went to Japan and when I was in my 20s and used to go to this video shop, like this bootleg video shop, gather all these videos, like people I'd never seen, it was an amazing thing. Now it's like it's all on YouTube, right? So this burden of information too that these younger people are dealing with, and I think there's a certain anxiety, right, of like, I gotta know how to play like Jamerson, I gotta know how to play like Jocko, I mean, Chow and whatever, it's like all this stuff, and it might force a lot of people to move on too quick, right? Like they say, okay, I got that. Now what's next? I got that. What's next? We would sit with one record for a few weeks or a month or more and wear it out. I mean, I did that less than people older than me. So, it's like for them, I probably, skirted by some stuff too. So it's always like looking back and thinking it was better. But it's a mix. I think it puts a bit more pressure on how we take in information, and make sure that we are as thorough as we can be and not feel this pressure of moving through it all too quickly. I didn't know how to play like Cuban music when I came to New York at all. And then I started playing with Danilo Perez, and he would show me, listen to Kachar, listen to these great recordings, and I soaked it up, but I didn't master it at all. I was just like kind of pragmatically getting it together so that I could do it on the gig. You don't have to master everything, but you have to kind of get a sense of what the style is, what it's coming out of, what's the essence of that. What is the big? But like I said, it's kind of the bass is doing the same thing, might have a different rhythmic thing, but its approach is very similar. So that's really helpful.
Well, let's chat about a few of the things. I love how, once again, it's an ECM recording. Once again, the sound is just fantastic.
Oh, can we, when we get onto ECM, can we just comment on how wonderful their album covers are? The artwork. I mean, they're works of art. I mean, really.
Yeah, I mean, this is the whole aesthetic of Manfred. It's like the whole thing is connected, right? The way it looks, the way it sounds.
Oh, it's a very Blue Note oriented.
Yeah.
Think about how wonderful their covers are, and think about how small they are on CD.
Unfortunately, right? This is a drawback to CDs. Yeah, but luckily, ECM puts out a lot of stuff on vinyl still.
Yes, they do.
Right?
Yeah.
I think there is also a book of their album covers.
Yes.
I think there is, yeah. Yeah, it's a certain aesthetic. You can tell them right away, right? Which is really important. But also, the thing with Manfred also is with very much a visionary, but the way he doesn't really say so much while you're recording necessarily. He has more of a hand, I would say, in general at the mix, finding this way to mix very quickly, kind of off the cuff, but finds it really quick. And also with programming, like the order of tunes, he's really good at that. Sequencing, yeah. So that was really helpful for me. The mix was really interesting because I had recorded the Gleaners in New York, but I happened to mix it in France with Manfred at a different studio, and I think we started at 9 a.m. and we were done by 12:30. Like super fast. Even for only a record. Right. So it's kind of what people might be surprised at with him is that it's really kind of jazzy in that way. It's like kind of go with your instincts, but
in the moment.
Yeah, but he has such good instincts at work.
So let's talk about
the
father and son.
Oh yeah, Wolfgang. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Wolfgang, I had met in 1990 when I was playing with Gary Burton for a year. I moved to Boston to play with Gary. My friend Donnie McCaslin, who was playing saxophone, told me that Gary was looking for a bass player. So I went out there, and so I met Wolfgang. He was playing with Gary that year. Yeah, we just kind of connected, and we started to play. Once we both left Gary, I guess in '91, he started kind of his solo career going, and so we were playing a lot in Europe at that time. So I've been playing with him since '90. I've always appreciated his compositions and his just way of kind of like, he's another guy who's very much influenced by classical music and brought that into his composing. So we just kind of connected in that way. And then these records for ECM, he kind of put together kind of an all-star band, for those with Brad and Brian Blade and Ambrose Akamusir. So it was just another one of those things where you go into the studio, it sounds good right away. You can't really mess it up because it's all cool. Like even if you mess it up, it ends up sounding good, Early when I was in New York, I did a record with D'Angelo, his first record I played on.
Oh, okay.
And when I heard his stuff, I was like, oh my God, this is a guy who's got everything together, harmonically, rhythmically, piano playing, singing, it was just a no-brainer that this guy was huge, but like to play bass on that stuff is really like playing with Stevie Wonder or with Donny Hathaway or something.
So a couple more songs. I'd like to sort of put your trio recording, the tune Ode, which is just fabulous. And then we can segue into when Pat Metheny joined in and you did the song Toward the Light. How's that?
Well, first of all, Ode to me is an amazing composition. And I think Brad has written some tunes that are really standards. They could be classified as standard. I'm sure they will be thought of as such. They're really a unique fingerprint on composition to me that's brought in pop music, classical music, and jazz. It's a unique voice through that. And Ode, I think, is a great example of that. Kind of a pop tune, but with a lot of harmony. The harmony is actually quite moving. And it's also one of those tunes like with Brad, we've been playing so long and he's written so many tunes that over the years what we've done touring-wise is kind of always been doing new material, as he writes it. In the last few years, we've been talking more about let's bring in some of the older tunes. Let's play some of those tunes that we played at the beginning or the middle and just reinterpret them as we are now. And that's one of them that we were playing up until the pandemic. But so it's kind of neat to do that too, to see like how we would play them now, maybe 10 years later. And then with Pat, I had been playing trio with Pat, let's see, that would have been, late 90s, off and on that time. And then, Pat was a big fan of Brad's and knew his playing really well, loved his playing. And Brad was one of the first, I think, records he ever heard was Travels of Pat's. And so there was definitely a musical admiration on going both directions. And so it just seemed like the right thing of collaborating. And so, I remember that recording really well because my wife, Rebecca, was 8 months pregnant. No, wait a second. She was like really pregnant, like any day pregnant. And I was going back and forth into the city to record. I was like, oh, I hope I get back in time, So it's a bit of anxiety, actually, added anxiety for me to do that record. But what else do I also remember that we did it in the studio that's no longer there on the far in Midtown, but on the far west side. It was Right Track Studio.
Oh, sure.
They had a couple studios, but this was one way on the west side. It was gigantic. I had never been in such a huge studio. It was like you had to almost get a golf cart to go from one end to the other. So sonically it had to sing. And so, we weren't really that close. It was kind of a weird setup because it was such a huge room. So it was one of those things like, I hope this works. I hope this kind of ends up sounding like it's coming together. And I think it does. But then, then we went and toured for a nice big chunk of time after that and got to play a lot of that music together live and to broaden it, to expand on it. To play that music live, like anything, it's like it just always gets better. It gets more open. And we also just playing with each other, we figured out how to go to a deeper place. And that's funny because I was thinking, wow, it would be so great to do it again now, whatever it's been, like 15 years later. So, hopefully that could be something that we could get to some more and see what develops.
This morning we went out to get coffee and I had Ode on in the car and my wife was going, that reminds me of a Stevie Wonder harmonically.
Yeah. It's a really beautiful tune, and actually Rebecca wrote some lyrics to it, and we've recorded it too and played it. So it's kind of a pop tune, actually. Harmonically, it's pretty inventive, and also just the way he arranged the layering of the bass is kind of out, and then it kind of joins in with the melody, and it's got really a different setting for it. And it's probably clear, but the tune I wrote for Fly called JJ is a dedication to Jerry DeJohnette. I was always into Jerry DeJohnette, but I was listening to this record he did with B.B. King, Alive and Well, right?
Oh, yeah. Sure, classic, yeah.
Yeah, and just that way of playing to me, like, okay, how do I get that? How do I kind of get into that a little bit on the upright? And so that song came out of DeJohnette for sure. So there's always these connections.
I'm a big Sinatra fan, so when you were playing with Ethan Iverson, you did What's New.
Okay.
That's a great tune. It's a great tune.
Classic. I mean, if you want to learn standards, go to Frank Sinatra, right? I mean, because, he covered all the great ones. And also, I don't remember what key he played that in. Sometimes you learn these tunes in a real kind of standard way. Like now everybody plays it in C, or Body and Soul, we always play in D flat. But if you go back to a lot of these early singing versions, they're in different keys, right? And so you learn them in different keys, which is always, it's helpful as a musician just to be able to move through keys on the same tune, but also how the key of the tune affects the mood of the tune.
Sure.
And so it's like, why do we always play Body and Soul in D flat? Like, why not play it in G or whatever? It's like, it might be more appropriate to the mood that you want to get across. So I always go back to Sinatra if I'm learning a tune, typically, not only to get his interpretation, but maybe also a different key.
Well, it's interesting he picked that song from that record because, to me, Only the Lonely may be the greatest Sinatra record, bar none.
Yes.
And the fact that Lee Konitz is on it, there's a whole Tristano kind of thing going on there as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was a fun record. That was another record that was probably done in like 6 hours. We had not all played together as a quartet before, so Lee was amazing. I mean, he was one of those guys you notice this with that generation. They play one note, it's like, oh yeah, everything. It's all there. Sonically, it's right to the center of the heart. And I remember on that date too, looking down and he had a towel in his horn while he was recording. I wasn't sure if he was aware that he had left it there or he was trying to get that sound. He didn't say anything, and just let it be. And then I noticed a little later it was out of the horn, so maybe he had forgotten and left it in. But with it, that it was cool too. It's like those guys could do no wrong.
But don't you find it interesting that you've got this chunk of metal, right? And you can tell Coltrane from Konitz to Barbieri in a note or two out of a chunk of metal.
Right. It's unbelievable. And, I always think of that with the piano, too, which is such a mechanical instrument, but you have two piano players sit at the same piano and get two different sounds. It's like, man, obviously it's here, bass, electric instruments are, unique on that, too, because so much of it's coming from the electricity going in. But guitar, electric bass, it's like, man, unbelievable. Yeah. So that's the beauty of music, though, right? It's made up of individuals and personalities that change the way we think about that instrument.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So last but not least, hopefully, we can get through this pandemic, hopefully in 2021. What does the future hold for you, Larry?
Well, we're all hopeful. So, I have a tour in Europe with Brad in May scheduled. So we're going to see if we're able to do it. Hoping, in May and then in July. So, I'm just kind of hoping that everybody feels comfortable getting back into a concert situation. Or whatever it is, and I think it's going to happen, of course, but I just look, being optimistic at this point because I'm ready to go play, even though I am enjoying my time at home, but I want to get out there and get my calluses better. They are getting a little soft. Yeah.
Any future collaborations that you're looking forward to, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Everything's been on such hold, waiting to see what develops. I mean, I was doing quite a few solo gigs before this all started, so I kind of want to continue that a bit more. And experiment with that and get more comfortable doing that. I want to play with my friends again, and see what develops. And And for me, also recording is such a great thing, you know. So I want to continue to just explore different ways, get the sound right in the studio, and if we practice all this time at home, then we want to be able to get into the studio and have it captured on tape still, you know. And that's a big deal, you know. It's not just like standing in front of a mic and playing. There's so many things that go into it. So that to me is a continuing. The learning curve is huge on that. So I look forward to more moments of that.
Well, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure talking to you. And I love how much you know. I really do. It's fabulous going all the way back and such. It's wonderful. And I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Appreciate the time. Yeah. It's fun to talk
Great
to you.
stuff.
Thanks for doing what you guys are doing.
Oh,
You're more than welcome.
Till then, take care. Yeah.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye now.
All right, Larry, great talking to you. Great.